Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. And what a nice day it's been. I hope there's a few people around there in chat. I can see Mithrin's in. It won't happen again, by the way, what happened last week. I won't lock everybody out. So good evening. See, I'm going to type it at the same time. I'm here. I'm ready to go, actually. Now, I've got quite a lot of stuff to get through tonight. We had a very interesting show last week, and it's really highlighted what's going on in the country all over the place. And we're finding that all of these remote authorities aren't doing their jobs. We've had these useful idiots being outed. We've got councils, police, courts, and all the stuff that's been brought to light over the years since we've been doing this. It's all culminating, and it's got quite serious this week because of several things that have happened in the courts, which I want to get onto. But basically, we've got a situation now where freedom means submission. When I asked a lawyer about inalienable rights some time ago, this was someone who's just qualified, she said to me that we don't have inalienable rights, which actually shocked me, because if you don't have inalienable rights, then you don't really have any rights. You have rights which are granted. Inalienable rights cannot be liened or taken away. So, in other words, the Human Rights Act describes us as a person. Every person has a right to justice before the law. You know, every person, that is. And a person, as we know, is not a human being. So the inalienable rights were taken away by the Human Rights Act. And also, we've got this broad definition of community, which is very important with what we're going to talk about tonight. Because we're finding that certain people in a community, which is really just some interested group, can now choose to take offence and actually instigate proceedings in courts against people who they feel have offended them. Now, what's happened at this point in time, I think, is that the state has actually assassinated truth. And this is something that, when you look back at history over hundreds of years, this has been always the case in Britain. It's always been like this. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Poor Laws, or you're talking about heresy, or you're talking about the present situation. Because what we've got now is beyond a police state. We've got this corporatocracy. Now, the government should really know that someone's opinion is not the law, and the expression of opinion cannot be unlawful unless it actually incites a violent or unlawful act. And this is what they're trying to do. And MI5 have been doing this for a long time. They've been talking through their think tanks like Demos about this threat of the far right. And then, of course, we have the alt-right, which loads of people latched onto and said, I'm alt-right, which is a huge mistake, because then you can be labelled by the state as far-right. Now, what's really sinister about these objectives that are going on here is we know that Brexiteers, people who voted for Brexit, were totally demonised when the Joe Cox event happened. And this whole narrative that's coming out of the security service is so blatant now. You've got this Mark Rowley who was saying, we've foiled these terror plots. 4 far-right terror plots were foiled. This was earlier this year. Now, they never actually tell you what they were. But apparently, he gave this speech and he said something about there was a threat that somebody was going to bomb a gay pride march. Well, wait a minute, that's not far right, is it? So what they're doing is they're throwing everything into the politically correct paradigm. So basically, the government at this point needs to know that someone's opinion is not law. Someone's opinion is not the law. And we've had a few cases of that recently. Now, we've had Jez Turner, who's been sentenced for making a speech. And we can go through a bit of that, actually, because I've got the court transcript here. And Alison Shablow, this thing's been going on a long time. And I think this Count Dunkula thing with this, I mean, this is so absurd. If you said this to somebody from another planet, they would not believe you. They said, you see, this is a dog, and it lifts its paw up. Now, many people can actually get their dog, Pavlovian style, to lift up their paw. So this guy's equated that with it being a Nazi salute, but it's the dog that's lifting its paw up. And all of a sudden, he's got an £800 fine. Now, this kicked open the door for the Alison Shablow case, because that was meant to be about sharing something. Now, in actual fact, she uploaded videos to YouTube. She didn't share anything with anybody. It was YouTube that shared it, and YouTube were the ones who could have censored it. It's their platform. It's not her platform. She put the songs up, whatever you think of them. So what seems to be happening is that judges, under pressure from lobby groups, are now having to act in a certain way. And this is not really applying the letter of the law. Now, I'm just looking at something from I was reading earlier on, and it's all about an American perspective of this country from quite a long time ago. It says, I grew up in England knowing that the only place in that country where you could criticise the government was at Hyde Park Corner. As a teenager, I heard a joke about the corner that resonates even more with me in today's environment. Now, a man is standing on his soapbox promoting a revolution. He makes a string of promises prefaced by words, come the revolution. Eventually the promises become less significant and he says, come the revolution, we'll all wear shirts and ties. Now, I think I remember this person doing this at Speaker's Corner, and it was kind of way of showing the audience that they were sheep because they all agreed with him at the end. And he sort of finishes it with, come the revolution, you will do what you are bloody well told. It's a kind of simplistic analogy, but it's actually true because that's what's happened. Hyde Park Corner as well, when people get to talk about Speaker's Corner, this is really, really interesting. And Hyde Park Corner was where you were allowed to say your last few words to the world before you were executed. So basically, Hyde Park Corner is not about free speech. It's about being granted a few words before you are executed by the state because you're their property. So that's a kind of irony that all of this stuff has been kicking off around Speaker's Corner, which is not a place of free speech. And I think we're beginning to find that out now. But it carries on. The challenge for the American revolutionaries was to get their message out to the people without access to newspapers. Now, this is going to be important because I've got some ideas, and I've been thinking about this for quite some time, about getting information out. The British government controlled the newspapers because they were owned by the landed aristocrats. The power of the newspapers was well known at the time of the American Revolution. William Cowper's poem, Progress of Error, published in 1782, explains it. Now, it says, how shall I speak of thee, or thy power address, thou god of our idolatry, the press? By thee religion, liberty, and laws exert their influence and advance their cause. By thee worse plagues than Pharaoh's land befell, diffused make the earth vestibule of hell. It carries on. But the whole point is we have an unelected media. And everything is steered through the unelected media. If you look at the way these cases are reported, particularly the Alison Shablow case, it's all about ad hominem. And all of these things are. Now, anybody who's had any experience with the press will know this. They will know how the press operate. So it's amazing when all of these hundreds of thousands of people have been featured in the press for all of this time, that the majority of people, or a large proportion of people in this country, do actually believe what's said in the press, which is amazing. I mean, newspapers are becoming very, very unpopular. I mean, you've got things like the Mail Online now, which is basically just full of adverts, and it looks like some kind of local advertiser with the amount of adverts in there, and the quality of the stuff in there is garbage. So there is a point to this that, yeah, people are turning away from all that, but they still control a lot. They are controlling the narrative. And this takes us back to, really, most of the things we've talked about in the show. We've got the priest class, the gatekeepers, and the useful idiots. And we talk about the useful idiots every week. And they make people defend their own limitations. They ridicule anything that's unknown. And they accept all the imposed limitations. And they are genetically compliant. It's kind of amazing, really, that we're at this stage. Because these few cases that have happened recently highlight that there's a big problem with the way people are reacting to all this as well. The mere fact that the public are able to let this happen. And I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but we're doing some talks down in Glastonbury on the 16th of June, and the people who've been sending me this amazing information that I've been putting out over the past year, I'd like to thank them. And anybody who's free on the 16th of June, come down to the King Arthur pub in Glastonbury. You can pay on the door. We might have to reserve tickets if it gets any busier. We've got quite a few people already coming, but it should be all day. And we've got Piers Corbyn, myself, and Sandy Adams. Sandy's going to be talking about Agenda 21, the bigger picture, and how it affects people locally. I'm going to go into the bigger picture behind Agenda 21 and beyond. And Piers is going to talk about how the climate change agenda fits in with all this. And it does. The climate change agenda really is a big part of it. And, of course, most people who listen to this show will know that. But we see around us this paradigm being built. And it's very much like the old days of heresy. I'm actually making a documentary at the moment about heretics, and the first heresy laws were brought in 1401. And the first priest to be burned as a heretic was in 1401, when this act came into power. And the whole thing about heresy is quite interesting, because what we're seeing now is persecution of people, and they are being labelled heretics, basically. And it's an interesting situation, because when we talk about heresy, we talk about this thing called the heretico comburendo, which means concerning the burning of heretics. Now, this actually mirrors what's going on in the country today, apart from they're not burning people yet. The laws laid down precise guidelines for legitimate and illegitimate expressions of religious belief. Unlicensed preaching was banned. Can you see where this is similar? Look at what's happening at Speaker's Corner. Look what's happening to people all over the place. Look what's happening to Windows on the World. I mean, we've had a lot of threats from certain lobby groups, but I always say to them, stop lying, that's libel. And they do back off, because one thing that's very important with all this now is to try and keep it inside the law as much as possible, and hold those people who are stretching the law accountable. This is really, really difficult. Now, I've been looking at this for ages. I've taken on the police, I've taken on councils, and one thing that I can say with some confidence is that the gatekeepers stop anything happening. So maybe the answer to all this is to sort of go underground with it all and do what these real secret societies did. And you may say, oh, that's a contradiction. You're holding some talks. Well, the talks are all the stuff for the public. The talks are the stuff that we want people to get out there, because there are some things happening locally. Now, we're doing this for the people who are wide awake and concerned and interested, really, because most of this is about how interesting is it to you? How interesting is it? You know, I mean, I actually find the whole paradigm, as you call it, I suppose, of what's going on really interesting, because the psychological control that's going on and the implementation of it is actually very simple now, and it's past its sell-by date in a lot of ways. We've done all this stuff about the Tavistock Institute and how it goes down into Demos, how it goes down into the Economic and Social Research Council, Policy Exchange. There's so many of these think tanks and NGOs, and now it comes in at local level. And it's amazing that the public are still putting up with it, actually, because it's getting so draconian now. And I'm being generalising here because I've focused on this stuff for so long. I'm trying to get an overview. But this is an interesting thing about heretics, because this act from 1401 also stated that those who would not recant beliefs contrary to church teaching would be found guilty of heresy by those church courts and burned at the stake by secular authority. Now, we have a very similar situation with so-called hate speak in this country now, because people are not allowed to hold beliefs which are deemed by the state not to be acceptable. So, when I looked into what was happening in this country from the poor laws up until the heresy laws and beyond that, it really all only changed in 1837 when the birth certificates were issued. That's a carrying on of a thing called the Certificate of Settlement. But I suppose if you look at over the past 500 years, we've just seen our rights destroyed. All rights have been destroyed within 400 to 500 years, and at no more time have they been destroyed as much as they are now. And of course that's due to the anti-terror laws. And the interesting thing about the burning of heretics, I'm making this film at the moment about Smithfield in London, is that the City of London paid for all the burnings at Smithfield. So it was the City of London Corporation. So basically what you had was ecclesiastical courts where you would be tried and you would be given chance to recant. In other words, say, yes, I'm guilty of being a heretic and I recant, will you forgive me? They'd say, okay, if you accept the Catholic Church, the Universal Church, as the only intermediary between you and God, then yes, we'll let you live. And a lot of those people at the last minute couldn't do it. They would not abjure, and many of them were actually put under terrible stress and situations. And this is a very big thing, because the whole idea of the heretic is somebody who's able to choose. That's all it means. Heretic just means somebody who is able to choose. So this is this law that came in, de heretico comburendo. It urged that this wicked sect, preachings, doctrines and opinions should from henceforth cease and be utterly destroyed, and declared that all and singular having such books or any writings of such wicked doctrine and opinions shall really with effect deliver or cause to be delivered all such books and writings to the diocese of the same place within 40 days from the time of the proclamation of this ordinance and stature. So then it was the church, and the church became the parish council, and of course now it's the council, because we have the same thing with prevent, which is a kind of, that's a new Inquisition really into what the council have taken it upon themselves through the government to implement upon the citizens. So this is another part of this act. It says, if any person such books in the form aforesaid do not deliver, if you don't deliver your heretical books to the diocese, the same place, such person or persons in this behalf, defamed or evidently suspected, and every of them may, by the authority of the said ordinance and statute, cause to be arrested. If they fail to abjure their heretical beliefs, or relapsed after an initial abjuration, they would be burnt, that such punishment may strike fear into the minds of others. Now, this is exactly what's going on in the courts at the moment. They're trying to shut down any form of free speech, but there's also a bigger picture behind it, as usual. But when we look at what's been going on recently with the Alison Shablow case, and also with the Jeremy Turner case, there's something going on here, because we've also got this other character, Tommy Robinson. Now, he was actually taken to prison, and people are saying he's been abducted and taken to prison. He hadn't. He was under a suspended sentence, and he breached the conditions of that, so he has been locked up for 13 months because he was going into courts and filming, which is against the law, and he was also filming defendants before they'd been properly tried. And that's why, when he went to that court, he was actually in breach of the conditions of his suspended sentence, so he was arrested. But I've done quite a lot of research on this character, and I would say he's rather different from the other two people we're talking about, because his real name, as we know, is Stephen Yaxley Lennon. His father was Thomas Lennon, and he also uses two British passports going by the names of Andrew McMaster and Paul Harris. In 2014, he was convicted for conspiracy to fraudulently obtain two mortgages, which involved a mortgage broker called Deborah Rothschild. Now, she must be rather low down in the food chain of Rothschild, because she was actually put in prison. Now, Tommy Robinson's cousin, Kevin Carroll, was a candidate for the Police Crime Commissioner's job in Bedfordshire in 2012. But it was in the 2009 that the EDL was launched, and which is basically another state-controlled opposition group. And I had some interactions with the EDL, and what they're doing here, this is the intelligence services setting up people who are stupid. So basically they're trying to make everybody on the right of centre or right of left, it doesn't really matter now, because we haven't really got right and left anymore. We've got what we have the intelligence services calling the extreme right, or the alt-right, which they're trying to label extreme right. But the people who are drawn to this are sheep. They're absolute sheep, the people who go down there shouting about Tommy Robinson, because he's basically an Israeli agent. He's got pictures of him on an IDF tank. He works for Rebel Media, which is a completely Zionist operation. And there's him, there's Katie Hopkins, there's this guy called Pat Condell, and there's this other one called David Vance. And they all sing from the same hymn sheet. In other words, get Christians to attack Muslims for a third-party interest. And people can't get the strategy of this at all. So it's basically, far right, far left. We've got far left. The far left are much more dangerous, because the far left are being promoted by the state, and the far left are agents of the state, agents of Soros as well, of course, but they are agents of the state. And it's all down to breaking it up into identity politics. Now, basically, a lot of this EDL stuff, it came out of football hooligans, really. That's where the big recruiting ground is. And he's said that in 2015, Tommy Robinson, or Stephen Yaxley Lennon, or whichever other name he uses, said that the police attempted to blackmail him into becoming a double agent to feed them information on Britain First leader Paul Golding. Now, this is where it's all starting to get very surreal, because you've got this in my opinion, complete puppet that's been put there to foment this far right, which doesn't really exist, because I've been all over the country and I haven't found any pockets of real far right extremism. There aren't any. There just aren't. In fact, what seems to be happening, even in places that used to be kind of considered to be, right wing, which doesn't really exist anymore, you are now getting this huge kind of liberal backlash against everything. For instance, butchers' shops are being attacked by animal rights activists. They're going for basically just ordinary people. But I just want to get into this, actually. The secret barrister, he wrote something about this Tommy Robinson affair. He said, the former leader of the English Defence League, convicted fraudster, sometime football hooligan and self-reinvented free speech advocate, was arrested outside a court building after live streaming footage of participants in a criminal trial. Now, we need to get into what this is, because people are up in arms about him, but not particularly the other two, which is Jeremy Bedford Turner and Alison Shabler. I'll get to those a bit later. And there's this fella in France also, Herb Ryson, this author, and he's written many books about Israel, and he's now been threatened with jail, and you can find that online. It's quite interesting, actually, as to how he responded. But the thing is, Yaxley Lennon, with the name that he's been most frequently convicted under, was arrested outside Leeds Crown Court, having recorded a number of men, including defendants involved in a live trial, entering the court building and live streaming the footage on Facebook in what is said to be an attempt at legitimate court reporting. West Yorkshire Police, having been alerted to his activities, arrested him at the scene for a suspected breach of the peace and bundled him into a police van. So what do we know? Well, he was subject to this suspended sentence, which was imposed last year, when he was also held in contempt of court. On that occasion, during the course of a rape trial at Canterbury Crown Court. Now, I remember this, and he was definitely inciting people outside the court. So, what he's doing is against the law. So, it says he referred to the defendants as paedophiles and attempted to video them before settling for doing an on-camera speech inside the court building. Now, taking photographs or moving images inside a court building is one of the most obvious contempts of court you can commit. It's called Section 41 of the Criminal Justice Act 1925. And court buildings are full of signs reminding people not to do this, so contempt of court is a broad catch-all term for various offences against the administration of justice. I was told by a judge once that I was approaching contempt of court, and he said, "You will very soon be in contempt of court. You're showing contempt for the court." I said, well, I was actually trying to hide it, and he didn't laugh at all. But contempt can thus be committed in various ways, from taking a photograph or even drawing a picture. Court sketch artists have to draw outside the court from memory, which is interesting. They can't actually sketch those pictures in the court. That's probably why they don't look anything like the people that they're meant to be. And it could be to abusing a judge, to publishing news reports or tweeting comments that could prejudice the fairness of a trial if a jury were to see them. In particular, there's a common law offence of criminal contempt, which is defined by the courts as conduct that denotes willful defiance or disrespect towards the court, or that willfully challenges or affronts the authority of the court or the supremacy of the law itself. It is unclear from the reports of Lennon's case last year whether he was dealt with for an S41 contempt for the filming or a criminal contempt for his broader conduct in willfully creating a real risk of prejudice to the administration of justice. Either way, he was hauled in front of the judge here in the trial. So the procedure for a court dealing with a criminal contempt is set out in the criminal procedure rules. Right, and it's summary procedure, where the court, having made its own inquiries and offered a contemnor, that is the official term, the chance to seek legal advice, can deal with the offender straight away. That's why he was asking for a lawyer, I suppose. Now, it's not about freedom of speech, this, or freedom of the press. It's about legitimate journalists. It's not about that. It's not about whether he's legitimate as a journalist, because he's not. It's about justice and ensuring that a trial can be carried out justly and fairly. So what he was doing, basically, cut a long story short, he's acting as an an agent provocateur outside the court. So, what's this in chat? So, did nothing to contravene. So it was just the sentences. Several former police officers have already gone on YouTube saying he did nothing to contravene his suspended sentence. Well, he did if he was filming in the court. He was outside the court when they stopped him. But the point is that he's acting as an agent provocateur, and he's working against the interests of this country. He's working for a third-party interest, and he's trying to foment racial tension and racial hatred. That's actually what he's trying to do. I've got no time for these Israeli agents whatsoever, because they are the problem. And him, Katie Hopkins, Pat Condell and David Vance, it's kind of clearly obvious what they're up to. But the Jez Turner case was actually a little bit different, because that was about a speech that he was making in Whitehall. And the offence was stirring up racial hatred, contrary to Section 18 of the Public Order Act 1986. He's said to have used threatening, abusive or insulting words, intending thereby to stir up racial hatred, or whereby in all circumstances racial hatred was likely to be stirred up. Now, this is what I'm getting to. I've looked at his court records here about what happened in the court, and his language was very strong, but basically he was having a go at the Shomrim, which is a police force that's used by the Jewish community, and these are police cars. Now, I don't know how this can actually happen, how they can have their own police force, because I don't think any other group would be allowed to have their own police force. They certainly wouldn't allow a Muslim or a Christian one. So it's kind of interesting the way that this is all going. And the thing is that I wrote an article a while ago called Israel's Agents: A Lawful Response, and it was all about this new definition of anti-Semitism. And at the time it was stated by a barrister that it wasn't legal. It couldn't actually happen. There was no way that this could really be enforced. But what we're seeing is judges choosing to be particular about their interpretation of the law. That's what I think we're seeing here, because when I've looked at all of these cases, they're not about the actual offence, because the offence in two of those cases was very, very difficult to prove. I don't think they could find a police officer to give testimony against Jeremy Bedford Turner, but they did find one eventually. So this is what you could call a witch hunt by the CIA campaign against anti-Semitism, which has been allowed to bring these private prosecutions. Now, it's kind of interesting, because if you try and bring a private prosecution yourself, there's all sorts of obstacles that get chucked in the way. If you try and bring a private prosecution against the police, there's loads of obstacles that get put in your way. I know loads of people who've actually got to the point of getting a private prosecution against the police, and then lots of hurdles are thrown in. They let you get a certain way with this sort of stuff. But it says here from Mark Rowley, this again is this threat of the far right. Mark Rowley from MI5, he's now resigned, I think. This was in February 2018. He said, last year, the security service MI5 joined the fight against the right-wing terrorist threat. Now again, this is all being manufactured by lobby groups and the security forces, the intelligence services. There are currently more than 600 live investigations and more than 3,000 people of interest at any one time. Now, this is very interesting, isn't it? Because what I was talking about last week falls absolutely under the anti-terror laws. And I told this to the police. They've got all the evidence, and we've had somebody whose life has been threatened. There's been a threat of kidnap. There's been threats of violence against a family, as people who tuned in last week would know. And nothing has been done by the police, nothing. No charges are going to be brought, as far as I know. And we've had the police having the information and not opening the emails. We've got a community policewoman actually, who's not opening the emails. for a few days and just leaving things. And in the meantime, situation's escalating. So they seem to be absolutely into this idea of mind control, and it means that we've got no recourse in the courts if they do this. So I'm suggesting that people start now to get organised and take things slightly underground, because there's no point in showing the state people's opinions anymore. There's absolutely no point, which makes all this stuff about Facebook and social media a complete waste of time, because it is an echo chamber. And even Demos said that it was the echo chamber effect. There was a whole paper done on it. And all of this psychological nudging that we've talked about has now come to fruition. And we are in a post-truth world. There is no truth. You can't actually get any truth from anything out there. And the truth has been completely assassinated. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that MI5 was singling out Tommy Robinson then earlier this year, and the way things have played out. And he also singled out Jada France, and of course that Paul Golding are in prison at the moment. But Mr. Rowley told the BBC, in the noise and focus on the global threat and what we've wrestled with Daesh, the Islamic State group, I don't think the change and growth in extreme right-wing terrorist threat has been explained or described well enough. And that's one of the things I wanted to do, he says. Now, he goes on about these live investigations. Last year, the security services joined the fight against right-wing terrorist threat. Well, wait a minute. The security services joined the fight against the right-wing terrorist threat. Well, if there was a right-wing terrorist threat, they would all have already been aware of it, or they would already have been manufacturing it, which is more likely. There are currently more than 600 live investigations. While they have not been involved directly in terrorism, yeah, he singles out the EDL. Mr. Rowley told the BBC, yes, in the noise and focus on the global threat and what we've wrestled with Daesh, I don't think the change and growth in extreme right-wing terrorist threat has been explained or described well enough. Yeah, so, okay. Now, I've been talking about this for a long time. This right-wing terrorist threat is something that, if you look into it, it's actually only being used by certain groups. And this is what I wanted to do tonight, was get into a paper that came out, and it preempted all this. It's from last year, and it's called the Fringe Insurgency. Now, it's a paper that's been produced stating it's about connectivity, convergence, and mainstreaming of the extreme right. What they mean by that is they want to weave a narrative that there is an extreme right and blame certain types of opinion on being extreme right. It's by Jacob Davey and Julie Ebner. And it says, this report maps the ecosystem of the burgeoning new extreme right across Europe and the US, which is characterised by its international outlook, technological sophistication, and overtures to groups outside of the traditional recruitment pool for the extreme right. Now, can you see what they're trying to do here? It's so obvious. They're trying to get anybody who maybe votes against being in Europe, heaven forbid, anybody who stands up for inalienable rights, they're a right-wing extremist. This is absolutely childlike psychology, psychological subversion by these two useful idiots. It carries on. This movement is marked by its opportunistic pragmatism, seeing movements which hold seemingly contradictory ideologies share a bed for the sake of achieving common goals. Now, do you know any movements which hold seemingly contradictory ideologies share a bed for the sake of achieving common goals? That never happens. And even if it were going to happen, it would be absolutely infiltrated and stopped, because every time in this country somebody has got something together that looks as though it's going to go anywhere and it's public, it gets infiltrated and shut down. And I've seen this time and time again. This is why big groups are a complete and utter waste of time, because they will have narrative controllers at their helm straight away. Everything is being controlled by change agents. We have this all over the place. Every single aspect of life is micromanaged. So these people are lying through their teeth for their own agenda. No, seemingly contradictory ideologies do not share a bed and achieve common goals. It never happens. It examines points of connectivity and collaboration between disparate groups and assesses the interplay between different extreme right movements. Now, they don't define what this is, but they go in to define the terms of what this is. So, in other words, then they don't tell you what they mean by that, but they define their own terms. Does this sound familiar? Occupy, Martin. Yes, Occupy. I mean, that was one of my specialities, Occupy, because we saw how it was taken over. But let me get through a bit of this first, because this is so sickening. And these people are injecting this poison into the bloodstream and the mainstream. Now, it says key influencers and subcultures, both online and offline, is what they want to assess and basically interrupt. Now, one of these people, Jacob Davey, is a researcher and project coordinator at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, overseeing the development and delivery of a range of online counter-extremist initiatives. Now, we've looked at all this over the past couple of weeks with Quilliam, the Quilliam Foundation charity, Hope Not Hate, the charity, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, a charity. Is anyone getting this yet? Small charities are being absolutely destroyed. And these charities that are basically there as lobbying groups to promote an ideology are allowed to continue. Every regularly meeting groups of over 50 people are monitored and infiltrated, including the Women's Institute. Yes, they would be, because every type of meeting that I've been to, I've seen this. This is why I don't go into groups anymore. Groups are a waste of time. They can't achieve anything. Only individuals acting collectively and under the radar can have any effect. And it's absolutely incredible. So let's carry on with Julie Ebner, is a research fellow at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue and the author of The Rage, the Vicious Circle of Islamist and Far-Right Extremism. Well, it's strange that these people never go on about extreme left extremism, which is where it's actually happening, Antifa and all this nonsense that's being promoted, these Soros groups. Because why? Because they're part of it. We know that. Her research focuses on extreme right-wing mobilization strategies, cumulative extremism, and European terrorism prevention initiatives. She advises policymakers and tech industry leaders, regularly writes for The Guardian, who would admit to that, and The Independent, neither of which are newspapers anymore, and provides commentary on broadcast media, including, of course, the BBC and CNN. Well, there you go. That's all you need to know, isn't it? But let's have a look at the glossary of the terms that they use, right? This is incredible. It says POL, P-O-L, the politically incorrect discussion board on the 4chan website. It has become a popular place for the discussion of extreme right ideology. Has anybody noticed? Activists often coordinate on these pages before running information operations. Now, listen to the way they talk about it. Information operations, as though it's some big military intelligence strategy. It's absolutely pathetic, because none of these groups, even the EDL, have ever had an information operation. They turn up ham-fisted at a place where they're not welcome and generally get told to go home. That's what happens, right? That's what happened when they marched in Whitehall. I went down there a while ago and I said to the police, when are they coming up? They said, oh, they've been stopped already. He said there was an anti-fascist mob, there was them. And the police, no, they said, well, they've all had their day out, because that's the whole point. And we've talked about government organised protests. The government organised those protests anyway. Activists often coordinate on these pages. Really? Oh, yeah. Okay. These people are promoting this fantasy so that it becomes reality in the minds of the public. It's very, very simple. Alt-light. Here we go. Alt-light. The alt-light, also known as alt-light or new right, has become an umbrella term for far-right groups. There they go. So there you go. Yeah, I voted for Brexit. You're a far-right extremist. That's what they're saying there. And individuals who oppose globalism and social progressivism. Okay, so if you're against this vile, disgusting liberal agenda, which is destroying the minds of everybody, then that's social progressivism. So if you're against that, then you're right wing. These people are disgusting. Like, it's oppose globalism. Well, what's wrong with opposing that? Who wants corporations running everything? Who wants Serco to be their government? I don't want Serco to be my government. Oh, I'm extreme right then. I must be an extremist because I don't want Serco to be the government. I don't want G4S to be the government. These people are out of their minds. Alt-right. Here we go now. Alt-right. The alt-right has become a catch-all phrase for a loose group of extreme right individuals. A loose group, right, who they've decided to name. A loose group who can't be named because they're not a group. So there's no such thing, in other words, right? And organisations who promote white nationalism. Now, funnily enough, that lunatic and his very privileged missus who took over my friend's venue, which is a trust, and we talked about it last week, he accused me of being a white nationalist and put it on his change.org website, whichever he's using this week. And he actually said, white nationalist, Mark Windows, handed the keys to the building to Wayne Cox. Now, this fella is a Jamaican. So I'm a white nationalist. I've handed the keys to the building to a Jamaican who was talking to me on the phone. I mean, this is how absurd these people are, but they never let facts get in the way. We are in the post-truth world. I suppose we have to have a laugh at it, really. And I'm trying to find more ways to put humour in. But when you've taken the mickey out of the intelligence services because they are absolutely out of date and inept, and you see these clowns getting paid to put these papers together, which are just propaganda pieces. Basically, what they're doing is inciting hatred here. You know, it's quite incredible, right? The alt-right has become a catch-all phrase for a loose group of extreme right individuals. Well, actually, it's not. That's actually not true. Counter-jihadists. The counter-jihad movement is a loose network. See, it's a loose network because it doesn't bloody exist. That's why. It's a loose network. A network's either a network. A loose network just means there's a few people here and there. It doesn't mean anything, actually. Of groups. Oh, there's groups, are there, who share the fear that their native cultures are threatened by an Islamic takeover. No, it's not actually that. It's bigger than that. And you're the people who are doing it. So these subversives putting these papers out in these think tanks like Demos, these are the people who are actually destroying the country. And then they blame it on people who don't like the country being destroyed. And they call them counter-jihadists. I mean, it's just incredible, isn't it? So if you're a counter-jihadist, you don't want your country swamped with people who are economic migrants. And that's the point. It's very, very simple. And you just couldn't make this stuff up, but they do. Discord. So they've got a glossary. This is in their glossary. An online chat application. Discord is an online chat application developed for use by gamers. It now hosts a number of extreme right channels. Okay, so people who are playing computer games all day are going to be a huge threat to the government, aren't they? I don't think so. I've never met any who were anyway. But maybe I'm wrong. Well, actually, yes. My mate, the scrap dealer from Essex, who had to flee the country. If you're listening, Alan, hello. Well, he was actually spreading the word on these gaming applications. So Martin said, is national action anything other than the invention of security services? Well, that's funny actually, Martin, because I did a thing called Comedy Nazis, National Action, because they put out a picture and they look like police. They just looked like a bunch of coppers who were dressed up in a uniform looking silly. And I got people telling me that the group was real. Now, I'm sure it was, but it was completely co-opted. I don't really know much about them. I did a show on it, and you can look at that National Action Comedy Nazis. And I did get a bit of stick from a few National Action people, which is that it was the first organisation to be banned as a terrorist organisation in this country. I don't know much about them because there was not much known about them, really. But I suppose that's when they call a loose group. But they weren't a loose group. They were a known entity. And, of course, I thought they were a security services operation because it was so clownish that anyone would think that that was a good idea to do that. Martin's put, the best analogy I have is that it is effective against everyone welcome view is that a lifeboat is just another shipwreck if it gets overloaded to the point it sinks. Same goes for countries. Yeah, I know what you mean, Martin, and you brought that point up very well the other week when you were challenging what Piers was saying about the overpopulation. But with the urbanisation programme, that's exactly what it's about. It's forcing everybody into cities and depopulating the countryside. And that is a very frightening thing because rural places are being attacked. Farmers are being attacked. I get contacted by farmers who are basically they are at the stage of just basically having the equivalent of welfare handouts to keep them going. It's quite incredible what's going on with that. But basically we don't have a country anymore, so what do we do about it? I mean, I'm just thinking of these solutions which I'll come up with in a short while. I'll relay some of those and just getting through this because I think it's very important that we target the right things. And these lobbying groups and these papers that come out, I do put quite a lot of importance into them because all of a sudden these are the narrative for your, for your journalist of the year. Demos. These papers that come out, these think tanks, Journalist of the Year, Kay Burley, laps this stuff up. She's a Journalist of the Year, you see. I mean, if anyone is guilty of inciting trivia, it's her. But the mere fact that they can actually make someone like that Journalist of the Year and not laugh out loud as they're doing it tells you really what's going on. That just gobsmacked me, actually. I just couldn't believe it. It was one of the things that I was speechless, actually, about that when I found that out. I just could not believe that was possible. And it is. It actually is. And she thinks she is a journalist. That's the really scary thing. She thinks making condescending remarks to people and calling people sexist and being politically correct is being a journalist. It's unbelievable. But then again, we have CNN, don't we? So, is Sky News any worse than CNN? I don't think it is, actually. But, oh yeah, they're going about the Daily Stormer here. Now, the Daily Stormer's been taken down. It says a popular neo-Nazi hate site and a key area for the dissemination of alt-right propaganda. Following a call to action by its founder, Andrew Anglin, the page became a platform from which activists launched information operations. You see, they make it all sound military, don't they? Information operations. I mean, this is incredible. Since the Charlottesville rally, the page has been effectively removed from the internet due to hosts blocking its services. Extreme right. Okay, so now they're going to go on to extreme right. Here we go. Groups and individuals that exhibit at least 3 of the following 5 features. Oh, these are the 5 features that they define, by the way. And this is where it ties into what's happening in the courts. Okay, nationalism. So, if you say you like your country, you're a nationalist. Well, I don't know any foreigners who come here who don't like their own country, even if they're escaping from it. Or they say they're escaping from it, or whatever. For whatever reason people come here, they always have some affinity with their own country. So if you've got any affinity with your own country, then you're extreme right, as defined by these 2 clowns who wrote this paper. Racism, xenophobia, fear of foreigners, yes, anti-democracy, and strong state advocacy. in accordance with the definition provided by far-right expert. Oh, we've got a far-right expert here now, Kaz Mood. Now, far-right is politically active groups or individuals which fall at the far end of the extreme left-right political spectrum. Their ideologies often include nationalist, again you see, xenophobic and or extremely reactionary elements. Gab is a social media platform which functions in a similar fashion to Twitter. They're going on about Gab now. It was designed to promote freedom of speech and has loose terms of use. It has recently been heavily adopted by the extreme right globally. So they're saying that people who use that because it's an alternative to the controlled opposition are all far right now. These people actually need publicly humiliating for writing this stuff, because the cowardice and the subversion that they are guilty of, and basically they are a threat to this country. They are a threat to the national security. The national security is now hinging on criminalising the citizens of its own country, which it has to now. But in actual fact, these people are extremists, and they are working for their third-party interests, the ones we've mentioned. And they're allowed to put this stuff in the public domain. Identitarian. Okay, so now we've got identitarianism. Yeah, identitarianism is a pan-European ethno-nationalist movement which focuses on the preservation of European culture and identity, drawing on inspiration of the French intellectual far-right movement, Nouvelle Droite. So they even have a go at that. So if you want the preservation of European culture and identity, then you're an identitarian and you're an extremist. Information operations. Oh, they're going to define that for us now. Information operations involve the dissemination of communications material with the intention of achieving a competitive advantage over an opponent. Well, wait a minute. Doesn't every business in the country do that? Well, they must be so your corner shop must be guilty of information operations then. Because which business doesn't want a competitive advantage over an opponent? These people are mentally retarded. It's incredible that they're even allowed to publish this stuff. This is why I wanted to bring it to your attention, because I read a lot of these sort of papers and I can't understand how or why they're allowed to do them. Because surely, if they're getting this stuff from the intelligence services, or the other way around, they're feeding it to the... I think it's the other way around. I think that these clowns feed this stuff to MI5, and MI5 just repeat it. And then MI5 repeat it. It goes through the Tavistock, and then it goes through Demos, it goes through the Economic and Social Research Council, it goes through the British Psychological Association, who produce these stupid, ridiculous papers, and then all of a sudden it's on Sky News. And Kay Burley's been very intelligent there interviewing them while they're doing their sound bites to the camera. Red pilling. Oh, let's see what they got to say about red pilling. In far and extreme right networks, red pilling is commonly used as a metaphorical description of attitudinal change and the embracement of fringe ideologies. Oh, so all of a sudden, this red pill thing is about fringe ideology. So, in other words, it's stuff that they don't like because it goes against their disgusting ideology, where we have to accept everything wiped out from us, where their third party, the most racist state in the world, never gets mentioned. Never gets mentioned as being extreme, despite the fact that they train the British police in a very dangerous form of martial arts. And they have centres for it all over the country. They train in G4S. And of course, we're not allowed to talk about that. So maybe we've been red-pilled. So it is a reference to the Matrix film trilogy, where individuals consume a red pill to no longer live in an illusion. Well, you said it. The term has become a euphemism for the radicalization process. I can't get over. These people are radical extremists. These two, in my opinion, should be put in prison for writing this. because it's absolute criminal subversion. The term has become a euphemism for the radicalization process. What waking up to what's actually happening is the radicalization process, where the consumption of a red pill, i.e. information pertinent to extreme right-wing ideology. Okay, so now we get it. They tie red pilling to extreme right ideology, which it had nothing to do with. That Matrix film came out years ago, and they've tied it to that. Yes, Martin, it is radical to know the truth. I think these people should be lobbied. I would ask anybody out there to get them for this, because this is so disgusting. Right, here we go. Social SJWs. SJWs, short for social justice warriors, is a term used by far and extreme right activists to decry socially progressive individuals. These people are mentally ill. And the people who took over the building in Tottenham are mentally ill. But they're allowed to get away with it. So these criminals are allowed to get away with stealing a building, calling us all racist, bullying us out of getting us out of the area, using dangerous people to get people out of the area. The police aren't going to get involved. And if you call them SJWs, you're far and extreme right. I think it's about time that people really stood up to this, because it's beyond what anybody could imagine. It's not even Orwellian. It's not as clever as that. It's just incredible. It's an absolute raging insult, this. So, yeah, Martin, yeah, it is radical to know the truth. Well, Mitherin said kiddie fiddling is the worldwide control mechanism. Yeah, in my estimation, yeah. Well, it is, and that, again, is being used to cover up the actual real abuse. So there's layers, there's so many disinformation people involved in that, working for the state, and I've exposed them. And so has a singer called Brian Harvey from E17. And he's banged them to rights of what they're doing. And people are still following these clowns. You know, it's incredible. And that's why I don't sort of go with a lot of these groups anymore, because a lot of them are aligned to people who are controlled opposition. And the controlled opposition has always been a big part of the so-called alternative viewpoint, the alternative media. In fact, I would say it's about 60% controlled by them. And I would like to say that we're not controlled by them, because it's me. And I've been attacked by a lot of these people over the years, and I've exposed them, because I thought that's what it was about. I thought it was about exposing them, you know. But I've got to get on to more. I'm going to have a break in a minute. But I was actually going to do an hour show tonight, but I think we should carry on. Yeah, Reddit. So Reddit is a popular content sharing and discussion site divided into interest-based boards called subreddits. Although a majority are not related to extremism. Oh, that's nice of them to say so, isn't it? Some subreddits have been associated with alt-right information operations. Oh, you pathetic people. How can you information? Well, we're having information operations, windows on the world, and tonight we're actually looking into the deep state and the alt-right. I mean, this is pathetic. Including the notorious The Donald subreddit. SJWs again. Shilling. In alt-right discourse, shilling refers to the aggressive promotion of certain ideas. Yes, like yours. Like yours. This is exactly what this paper is. It's an aggressive promotion of certain ideas in a disgusting, untruthful and subversive way. It's used both negatively for individuals promoting progressive ideas in alt-right fora, and positively to refer to efforts to promote their own ideology. Unbelievable. So I'll go into more of that in part 2, but for anybody who's interested, and I think you should be, it's called the Fringe Insurgency. You can download it. I might actually start putting these onto the website for people to download so they can look at this stuff, because I don't think that it's looked at enough. To me, this is the actual core of where it's coming from. These radicals, it's called ISD Powering New Generations Against Extremism, The Fringe Insurgency by Jacob Davey and Julia Ebner. Now, these two are absolute subversives. Disgusting what they're saying here. However, it's time for a bit of a break now. And, well, as usual at this time of night, we're going to be hearing from Ian Terry. There is a bit of rockabilly.
Way down Tennessee, they're dancing to rockabilly, rock that rolling stone. My baby, she's gone, a rockabilly rocking, everybody stomping tonight. Tennessee rocking, Tennessee rolling, Tennessee stomping, and the Tennessee rock. Tennessee rocking, well the Tennessee rolling, and the Tennessee stomping, and the Tennessee rock. Tennessee, still doing the robbery, and the South gonna rise again. Grab your baby cool van, a rockabilly rocking, everybody stomping tonight. Tennessee rocking, when the Tennessee rolling, and the Tennessee stomping, and the Tennessee rock. Tennessee rocking, and the Tennessee rolling, and the Tennessee stomping, and the Tennessee rock. Orangeburg, Tennessee, still doing the robbery, and the South gonna rise again. Grab your baby in a van, a rockabilly rocking, everybody stomping tonight. Tennessee rocking, and the Tennessee rolling, and the Tennessee stomping, and the Tennessee rock, and the Tennessee rocking, and the Tennessee rolling, and the Tennessee stomping, and the Tennessee rock. take it easy. Oh, baby, let it roll. Oh, well, I really like the way you move it to the rock and roll. My pretty little French Corvette, I can't remember where we met. Oh, we were bopping with the high class set. My pretty little French Corvette. Little Jackie Horner, smooching in a corner with my pretty little French Corvette. My pretty little French Corvette. My pretty little French Corvette. My pretty little French Corvette.
Right, that was Ian Hound Dog Terry there. And yes, back to this Windows on the World. I'm going to be checking the chat. There's not many people in chat tonight. I think it's because a lot got kicked out last week, or it's a very hot bank holiday weekend. Yeah. Tartary, the government is trying to create a civil war. Well, they'd love that, because then they just get the corporate people in to shut it down. And this has always been the thing. I mean, this is what agent provocateurs are for. And we've talked about one agent provocateur today, one that got arrested the other day. And there's more of them. There's loads of them. This is what they're trying to do. Control the narrative. It's very, very simple. And the tactics are so limited, which I think is quite important, actually, to listen to this stuff and get a hang of it. Because when you realise how subversive it is, you wonder why there aren't people who are meant to represent you that are disgusted about it. But all as we have is MPs who do not get involved in looking at any of this sort of stuff. They're just idiots, most of them. And there's a problem, isn't it? So I suppose the best thing to do is, keep ourselves under the radar and not get too involved in groups, because that was one of the big things that happened with Occupy. It was very, very interesting to see how that got completely and utterly taken over, and nobody did anything about it. This is what all amazes me, is that people don't actually do anything about it. They let it happen. Someone comes into a group who dominates the group, and nobody really questions where they come from, and then they become a facilitator. I mean, it was comedic what happened with Occupy. You had this guy called Mark Weaver, who's an undercover copper, and he turned up with one dreadlock and a clip-on earring, dressed in a German army coat with some Dr. Martens, and he just looked like a copper with a dreadlock and a fake earring in a German army coat. And he was a facilitator at a thing called the Bank of Ideas. And when I saw this in action, I just couldn't believe it. It's like a pantomime. And people accepted it. But it's no different from a council meeting. Because I think Eric Von Essex was telling me, I think it's Eric, he was he was telling me about going to this council meeting, and he sent me some of the councillors who were there. And it is amazing that these people are even employed. I mean, you'd think they should be in some kind of unit where they get looked after, because they're not the sort of people who are capable of making decisions, which is why they're there. But I think this is a big point as well about local authorities. I mean, this prevent thing, I've talked about it quite a lot, but I think it's really important that you keep all of your business away from local authorities. They interfere to a great extent, but people should now be chucking back these intrusions to privacy that they are now assuming. I follow quite a few councils on Twitter, and this big communitarian, communist ideal, the big society which it came out of, is being implemented with an iron fist now. And it's all done through being a volunteer. So I would say to people, don't volunteer for anything. You pay extraordinary amounts of council tax to these people, a third of it going on their wages at least. And they sit there arrogantly sending out this stuff that you've got to clear up your own rubbish. No, get them to do it. That's something that really gets on my nerves, because that is the sign of real tyranny and communism, when they start doing things like that. When there's a work programme. It's voluntary, of course, because the voluntary sector's massive, isn't it? And it's all done under the front of community organising. And again, sometimes I don't know where to go with this, because I've been covering it for so long. You can go back to our shows. Everything on there that you need to know about this stuff is there. And not that many people actually talk about it. And that's why these papers and these lobby groups and these NGOs and think tanks, they're producing the narrative for the intelligence services. You can clearly see this. You can clearly see it. They're being led by these people. And this is the key findings I wanted to get onto. The key findings of these two subversives who should actually be arrested for high treason. It says extreme right groups across the globe are actively collaborating to achieve common goals, such as keeping refugees out of Europe. Well, wait a minute. If they're collaborating to keep refugees out of Europe, they can't be a threat, because they're not been able to manage it, are they? It says removing hate speech laws and getting far-right populist politicians to power. Removing hate speech laws. Well, I don't know of any hate speech laws that have been removed. In fact, they don't even need laws now to interpret what is hate speech. Campaigns around the Defend Europe mission in the Mediterranean and the Charlottesville rally received financial and operational support from numerous European and North American countries. Alternative online platforms, some created explicitly for use by the extreme right, provide mechanisms for transnational knowledge exchange, fundraising and coordinated information operations. Their strategic, tactical and operational convergence has allowed the extreme right to translate large-scale online mobilization into real-world impact. Through coordinated grassroots activities, they have been able to influence elections, attract worldwide media attention and intimidate political opponents. Well, actually, let's have a look at which political opponents get intimidated in this country. I wonder who that might be. They go on, Reconquista Germania, an extreme right channel on the app Discord, set up to disrupt the German election, counts over 5,000 members from across the globe. High levels of opportunism characterise today's extreme right. Well, that's a reversal, because the audacity and the absolute in-your-face lawlessness comes from the other side. It comes from the extreme left, actually. And I'm not advocating extreme right or extreme left, because there's no difference anymore. It doesn't matter. It's just the way that they're defining this is absolutely sickening. So, in other words, if you don't want absolute mass immigration and you don't want your culture absolutely destroyed by these people who are imposing it, like the likes of these two clowns who wrote this, then you're extreme right. Yeah, it's absolutely sickening. And it says the most extreme fringe groups attempt to penetrate new audiences and mainstream their ideologies by using less extreme groups as strategic mouthpieces. Wait a minute, isn't that what the other side do? By infiltrating every kind of organisation under the sun. That's exactly what they do. So it's all reversal. So this is subversion. Yeah. So, extreme right networks use military and intelligence resources, such as leaked strategic communication documents from the GCHQ and NATO, to run campaigns against their own governments. This is absolutely incredible. By staging sophisticated operations in the style of military psychological operations, or PSYOPs, they seek to disrupt democratic processes in Europe. Now, where are the PSYOPs coming from? The PSYOPs come from our own government. Psychological operations. the Psychological Operations Division are working on Facebook and Twitter. They're called the 7-7 Brigade. And we've discussed that at great length. So the psychological operations come from the government. They don't come from people who are, you're saying, trying to influence government. Traditional counter-messaging campaigns are unlikely to have an impact on the cynical and tech-savvy alt-right. You see, the thing is about this is disgusting, is it's not done from any view of impartiality as though it's real. So you can tell it's not real because it's not impartial. It's absolute, just pure, vile, disgusting propaganda. So Martin says the people who are in real control are hard to track down, and having infinite wealth makes them well protected anyway. Well, of course it does. That's the whole point, because to them it's all a joke. They're funding it. And you've got to see that point of view. You can see that globalist point of view. You can see where they're coming from. If they have that much money and they think, well, the population needs reducing and controlling, and they're not part of the reduction, then you can see how it works. Because a lot of people who have this huge amount of wealth are extremely narcissistic. You only have to look at these people, though, and you see that a lot of them are incredibly weak as well. I mean, if you look at Bill Gates, that's just incredible. And when you look at the evil agenda that he's bringing into force all over the place, and Planned Parenthood, and we talked about that, and where Planned Parenthood came from, and the 1969 lecture with Dr. Richard Day, that was all out of Planned Parenthood, which became the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's a shocking paper, this, actually. I didn't realise it was as bad as it was, because I looked through it last week and I put it on one side to do a show on. It's a bit like that paper that came out, Could Psychology Hold the Key to Moving Beyond a Post-Truth World? It's on the same level of subversion as that. It's absolute lies these people are telling. I really hate Bill Gates, have done for the last 25 years, says Martin. And it also says, I wonder if the timing of the sentencing just before Bank Holiday weekend is all just a psyop. Everything's a psyop, I think, now. I really do, Martin, because there's nothing real out there anymore. It's just completely post-truth, which is why recently I'm getting a bit lost for words about what to say, because I've kind of said it all. I can keep going on with these points, but the actual solution has to lie within people's own way of dealing with it, I think. And not that many people are going to deal with it, but I can say with some confidence this last year that due to these extreme circumstances that I was in, I managed to bring down that Crime Stoppers site, and also that's now linked up with this ESRI. So these things are just about surveillance and monitoring and police state activity, and it means that the state is actually really not that organised. I don't think these people are that knowledgeable. When you look at military intelligence, which we have done over the past couple of weeks, I don't think that these people are actually intelligent. They use certain techniques, they use certain rules, but there is actually no intelligence going on there, and they can't be creative, they can't think their way out of anything, which is how you can catch them out. And they lie all the time. Most of the time they're lying. So it's not difficult. And this all started with bailiff companies and taking on the local council. That's how the whole thing started for me, because we started to get some kind of success within courts. And then we realised that the administrative courts were just stealing people's property. And then you realise, okay, it's beyond the law. Then you think, okay, we can go to the Royal Courts of Justice. We can actually go and see a master. Now they've shut the masters off from the public. I haven't been down the Royal Courts of Justice for a while, but when I did go and see a master there, it was helpful. But even then, you still have to be in possession of facts. You have to go down there and know what you're talking about, because if you don't know what you're talking about, they won't listen, which is a major problem, because they speak another language called legalese, which we're not trained in. But you can train yourself into it. And I think that thing with the form in Waltham Forest, where I got that form taken off, it was called a single person's discount validation form. Again, these things are quite important, because when they're trying to impose this stuff, there's actually no real plan behind it. It's just affront. It's just basically they're taking liberties with you, and they'll try and ignore it. But there are still some remedies out there. But because of the way that this hate speech, and they are redefining anybody as far right and all the rest of it, and hate speak, and just using these absolutely mechanical terms which don't really mean anything unless they are being interpreted by somebody who wants them to mean something, then that is a big problem. Because if you've got the courts now who are imposing these sentences on the back of somebody saying that they've got hurt feelings, who are a charity, who are bringing private prosecutions which are absolutely malicious, and of course the victim at the Jeremy Bedford Turner trial wasn't even there. He said he was there, then he wasn't there, so there was no victim. But if you're walking down the road and someone is shouting at the top of their voice and making a statement out in public, are you a victim? Well, I suppose you are if you choose to be a victim. But this is the point, that I find that I'm a victim most of the time now. And I think probably most people that listen to this show are. So come down to Glastonbury on the 16th of June. We'll be starting from around 11 a.m. So it's going to be quite a full day. Got myself, Piers Corbyn and Sandy Adams. And I'm going to be putting out a talk that I did with Sandy, which goes into how all this stuff works locally. And I think this is the key. Because taking apart these change agents locally, they're the people who are enforcing this stuff. And this vile paper, which makes recommendations, they make recommendations as well that we've all got to follow. It's researchers and practitioners should increase their awareness of the points of ideological convergence and divergence between these groups and leverage them to more effectively disrupt their efforts. Well, this is called open infiltration, and this was talked about by Demos, and this has happened. I mean, the most laughable one was, I think, when Nick Kollerstrom's book, 7-7 book came out in about, God, it must be getting on for 10 years ago now. And there was some people who turned up from an organisation who said they said they were from change.org, but change.org was just a front, and they were completely obvious, a bit like the Occupy ones, a bit like any infiltrator really. They were just shouting like 9/11 was an inside job. Yeah, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about something completely different. They usually go in with something that's completely off topic as well. Truth is extremely important. I hate this post-truth emotional triggering. I am really disgusted that it's so hard to separate truth from disinfo. Well, it's not, Tartary. It's not. It's easy to separate truth from disinfo. It's just that disinfo is being promoted as truth. And that's what this is so disgusting about this paper. And it's like the post-truth world, the British Psychological Association, stating that the deliberate publication of fictitious information, hoaxes and propaganda on social media, or fake news, they call it fake news, has become one way so-called conspiracy theories are spread. So they try and bring in everything together. They make a link between fake news, hoaxes, and what they call conspiracy theories here. And basically, this is so tired now. It's such a stupid and tired angle that anybody can argue it. And they can't argue their way out of a paper bag, these people, when it comes down to it. All they've got is ad hominems. So they're saying, could psychology hold the key to moving beyond the post-truth world? Well, that's absolutely impossible, because psychology is just based on models and theories which are stated to be behind perceived behaviour, and they've got nothing to do with truth. And the writers of this particular paper were Karen Douglas, Chi Xiang Ang and Farzin Davari. They make assumptions and many errors in their analysis, and there's an equally valid analysis of psychology which I just propounded. The role of psychology is to assume an empirical view which cannot be challenged by those not trained into it. It is therefore an establishment-approved cult. That's all it is. It's an establishment-approved cult, which was invented by a pervert. That's what it was. And then we can go all into afterwards with that, and how we went into the Frankfurt School and the 10 planks of communism being enforced on us daily. It's so obvious that this country is under illegal occupation. We do not have a government. The May regime is merely a puppet government and should really be removed. But then what we're going to go... We may have the Corbyn regime. The Corbyn regime may be quite interesting because he's not... They haven't managed to take him out yet. And he would renationalise things, which would be really against what the globalists... Oh yeah, must be far right mentioning the globalists. Martin says, 3 buildings brought down by 2 planes on 9/11. Official story, obvious bollocks, but how many different theories are people encouraged to spend their time on? That's a really good point, Martin, and it's something that's very important with all this, because this argument over nukes, mini nukes, directed energy weapons, and all this stuff is now of no relevance. The Keep Talking group recently hosted another talk by Hans Pommer, and I'm in touch with a nuclear physicist, and he has great problems with some of the things Heinz says, and Heinz has kind of adjusted what he said in his talk. But basically, yes, the horse has already bolted. I mean, we've got the culmination of the project for the new American century on our doorstep, really. So there's 5 countries in 7 years, and they're going for Iran. They are determined to do it. They are determined to do it. But it's incredible that, the 9/11 thing, that anybody would still believe the official story. It is incredible. I don't even want to get into it because, in a way, it's not important anymore, because we're now in the endless war on terror. The war on terror can never end because there will always be a new enemy. They will always keep creating the new enemy. It's genius, but simple. And there's nothing new about all this stuff. This is just ancient battle technique. That's all it is. And when you get these guys talking about psychological warfare, well, they're just copying really what people like Vlad the Impaler did. He got this reputation, didn't he, for impaling people. And basically that spread around. Oh God, no, don't go to war with him. You'll end up like that, you know. And this is how they do it. It's all fear driven, this stuff. And that's one of the Saul Alinsky rules, is that, the actual fear of something is worse than the thing itself. I think Theresa May have been forged in the centre of the earth. Do you really think she's that interesting? I mean, that one fell apart really quickly, didn't it, the Theresa May thing? She comes in as like, I'm Iron Lady. I'm the Iron Lady, No, you're not. You're the woman from the Women's Institute who puts jam pots on the table at the local church hall. It's pathetic. I mean, and she was under instruction from the powers that be as soon as she was in. She took instruction from them. Yeah, never-ending war equals never-ending profits. Yeah, well, this is the thing, you see. But I've got something a bit philosophical here, about halfway through. This is from the Nag Hammadi scriptures on beating the archons or the rulers. And this is like, this is what they were found maybe a couple of 100 years AD. They don't know exactly when these things were written. They're fragments of all sorts of different parchments. And you can't really trust the official story of how and where they were found, I don't think. But the quote is, the rulers fight against the inner person. That's exactly what they're doing. This is exactly what it is. They fight against your inner person by making you scared to say anything, by making you scared to challenge what is actually going on, and to shut down any form of debate. But more than that, it's a psychological manipulation. And that's all these people are doing. It's very disgusting psychological manipulation, though. So this is actually another one from the Nag Hammadi, from the secret book of James. And he says, so I tell you, be filled and leave no room for space within you empty, or he who is coming will mock you. That's a very profound thing as well, because that's exactly what is going on. Doubts are being put into people's minds about who they are and what they are, and that causes absolute internal stress. And psychological warfare is all about causing internal stress and exploiting that internal stress. That's all this is about. And I'm putting together a talk which goes into the bigger picture of all this. It's not going to be a sort of 10-hour stint or anything like that. It's going to be a couple of hours about rewritten history, forgotten origins, the destruction of knowledge, the cultural references that have been destroyed over millennia, cultural atheism, mortality with no divinity, all the stuff I've been covering really. But we've got to remember that this whole idea of conceptual power is all it is. This idea of what these people are implementing only works if the concept is put into reality by the people who are governed. And I remember in the olden days when we were doing that Freeman stuff, that it's a statute. It has to be by the consent of the governed. Well, the consent is implied through the poor laws, basically. I didn't know that as much at the time. But all of that stuff was quite interesting because it opened the doors, and I'm going to put a bit of that in my talk because that does open the doors to how you actually look at yourself and how you look at what's around you. And I think that's really important because it gives you a different perspective on what you are within the system that you've been put into. And what is the problem we have now is how do we get out of it, because it's so difficult to do anything outside that system. So I suppose the answer is that small communities have to get together and they have to start acting under the radar, because I've heard from people all over the place that homeschooling is now being attacked by these, let's call them the fascists in the local council, which is actually really denigrating fascists. These people are much worse than that. And I hear this from all over the country. And what's happening is everything's getting bigger. The councils are joining up, becoming more and more corporate, controlling the narrative at every level. And what I did the other week, bringing down that other site, Grimebusters, Waltham Forest, got that taken down. They go and photograph some woman in the streets with their third-party NSL, put it on their site and said, we'd like to talk to this woman because we're going to give her a fine. Well, a fine can only be issued by a court, not by some goon in an office. And I phoned up the goon in the office, put him on the spot, and he was full of himself. I think most people will remember the phone call. And then the next day, everything had gone. And I think that's really empowering stuff. That's really why I do all this stuff, because you can have an effect, and it's really gratifying when you bring one of these clowns down off their perch. And it's not that difficult, because they just have arrogance. They think they've got a certain protection because they're within the system. And I think people should be actually going for these people in their local council. And this is what I've said for years, and it's not really been happening. I've carried on doing it and had a lot of success. So why aren't other people doing it? This is the point. That you can do it. Oh, I don't want to rock the boat. Or become targeted. Well, actually, this thing about being targeted is quite interesting, and you can get a bit paranoid. But it's certainly the people in local councils, even though they have the power to do this, have not got the capability or the intelligence to do it. They're pretty inept. The targeting comes from other sources, in my opinion. But I was targeted by Waltham Forest Council. I did actually have my phone tapped. It was confirmed by someone who's an expert on phone lines that they were tapping my phone. I don't quite know why, because everything that I told them to their face, I would say on the phone, and everything that I would hold back, I would say to their face anyway. So there's nothing that I wouldn't say in public that I wouldn't say in private. And that's the thing. I'm a bit more careful about what I say on the show. Obviously, you have to be. But you have to frame things in a good, rational, legal way. And that's really important as well. And the whole point about conceptual power is that all political parties are one solid mechanism, and the enforcement comes through the legislative, executive, and judicial corridor of power. There's one corridor of power, and those outside that are punished through the judicial branch, and that happens time and time again. That's what this show's about. And there's a great phrase from General Petrov, who was assassinated, I think, in 2009. And he says terms like world government and new world order are circulated to mislead those who know something, which is quite interesting, because government is unstructured. But when we look at how it's unstructured, we can see how it is structured, which is absolutely fascinating. This idea of conceptual power. YouTube is the best place for being taught how to do something. Well, it is actually. If anybody knows how to get a SIM card that's jammed into a Samsung J5, please let me know, because I couldn't find it on YouTube. So if anyone is trying to contact me, I've been really stupid. I put my SIM card in, I forced it into this phone, which doesn't really fit into, in a kind of primitive way, and I'm basically not on any communicative level apart from, well, you can email me. But basically, I mean, useful idiots like these two who wrote this paper. I mean, it's incredible that they can get away with this stuff, and I would encourage people to actually write to these people. They're called, let's go back to the beginning, give you their full names: Jacob Davey, Davey, and Julia Ebner, Juliaebner. And they're talking about case study now. Defend Europe. So they're saying that those who want to defend Europe are far-right extremists. You couldn't make this stuff up. You just couldn't make it up. The Defend Europe campaign was launched in May 2017 by leading members of Generation Identitaire, a youth group associated with the French far-right intellectual movement Nouvelle Droite. As part of the campaign, a group of identitarian activists chartered a ship with the aim of disrupting the flow of migrants crossing from Libya and interdicting NGO vessels. Well, non-government organisation vessels, full of them. But now, the point is that a lot of countries have actually done that anyway and send them back. So, you'd have to actually look into this story. I think I will look into this story. I seem to remember something about it at the time. This is incredible stuff. This narrative attracted significant support from right and extreme right commentators and groups globally, with a diverse range of individuals expressing support for the mission, ranging from the populist British journalist Katie Hopkins. She's not British, she's Israeli. She's an Israeli journalist. That's who she works for. So let's not beat about the bush here. It's absolutely incredible that people get co-opted into supporting people like her. I mean, when I listen to some of the things she says, you have to see what's underneath it. She's a complete propagandist. Oh yes, and to David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. I don't know what to make of David Duke, because he comes out with a lot of the same stuff all the time. And the interesting thing about the origins of that Ku Klux Klan, it was taken over like everything else, because originally it was a group of people in a small community in the southern states of America, and they wanted to get rid of a corrupt councillor. Basically, they had this person in who they didn't like and they wanted to get rid of, so they put sheets over themselves so they wouldn't be recognised, and scared this guy out of town and told him not to come back. So that's the origins of that, which I didn't know about that, and I found that really interesting, that it was originally to get rid of corruption. It was to get rid of corrupt officials, so people could dress up as ghosts, for instance, and put a sheet on, and maybe get rid of some of their local councillors. That'd be quite a good idea, going to council meetings like that. Maybe it's time to have a bit of direct action. Well, this is what these extremists call for, isn't it? These left-wing extremists. They're allowed to put out things like libcom.org about direct action, and libcom.org is basically an extension of Black Bloc and Antifa, with their little toolkit for community organising, which is for people who are, let's say, well, challenged in any kind of way possible. I mean, if you read what they say, it's just ridiculous about going around people's houses and knocking on their doors. But they printed a load of disinformation about the charity that I was talking about last week. We're put on there by some liar, and they didn't take it down, and neither did the communist site that put this stuff on. So you've got these extreme leftists that are funded, and they're allowed to get away with absolute subversion. And then you've got these clowns who are actually calling everybody nationalist, far right and extremist, and writing papers about it. I saw a clip of Alex Jones' take on the Free Tommy Robinson today. Oh boy, after 30 seconds I had to turn it off. Well, it's actually quite an interesting one of him. If you go back to Alex Jones in about 2015, he's been interviewed by Alex Jones, and he says, "Oh, I pressed the panic button by mistake. The police are here." And then he went to talk to the police, and then he managed to bring it round to the fact that his life was in danger, and all this sort of thing. But again, yes, the intelligence services, I suppose. He was making out all hell broke out. All I saw were football yobs who were at the wrong party. Yeah, they were basically misguided people who have been terribly used, and I feel a bit sorry for them, really, because a lot of those people probably do have good intentions and they want to stand up for what they think's right, but they're just being led into an absolute dead end, and they're being set up to be put in prison. So this is the thing. It's very difficult to get this sort of counterintelligence and controlled opposition stuff over to people if they don't know about it. But when you do know about it, it's really simple. And getting back to Occupy, which is what Martin was filming, you know, the Occupy thing, it was really apparent there what happened, and then it got taken over. Oh, it became a worldwide movement. That was quick, wasn't it? It became a worldwide movement and totally controlled with facilitators. And now that model is used in your local council. That's exactly what they do all the time. They just do that constantly. The Delphi technique. So let's talk about the key findings of this paper. They're going about international collaboration. The European extreme right and American alt-right actively collaborated in mobilising a global support base, promotion and fundraising of the Defend Europe mission. Exploitation of grievances. The identitarians used common grievances such as identity and mass immigration and shared goals to appeal to a wide range of audiences and cement a more cohesive ideology. Normalisation of fringe narratives. Extreme fringes not officially affiliated to the identitarians were able to benefit from... This is again, so they're linking everything together. So they're linking what they call extremism with people who are moderate, and that's the way they do it. I mean, they must have got paid and funded a lot of money to do this. So some of the tags that they got, that they put out as basically being subversive, are hashtag Defend Europe, hashtag Identitarian, hashtag G-Star, hashtag White Genocide, hashtag Soros for Prison, hashtag Trump Army, hashtag End Gostoppen, hashtag MAGA, hashtag Defend the West, and hashtag Multiculturalism. So that's extremism, is it? Once the algorithm, it says here, had been run 10,000 words, most using conversations surrounding the campaign were then gathered with keywords which expressed ideological motivators being analysed based on the number of occurrences. Now, this is where all these companies come in who are data mapping. This is where all this data mapping is going to come in. So they're going to form these algorithms. I mean, have you seen how many websites are attached to your searches? It's incredible. It's hundreds and hundreds are attached to your searches. You can do that. You can just find out. You can do that on Google, you know. Here we go. Anti-left wing attitudes, e.g. smash cultural Marxism. Well, cultural Marxism was a movement, and they like to say it's some kind of conspiracy theory. Well, it's not. I mean, how can these people get away with this? Conspiracy theories relating to the migrant crisis, usually anti-Semitic in nature. Wait a minute. How does that work then? Oh, they're anti-Semitic because the people are. Oh, I see. Because they're Semites. Because they're Muslims, and Muslims. Quite a lot of Muslims may be Semites. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, right. That is what you mean, isn't it? I think so. Yeah. Oh, yeah. E.g. Oh, this is anti-Semitic, by the way. Soros for prison is anti-Semitic. Cultural preservation: the perceived cultural threat posed by migrant populations. No, actually, that's a reversal. Your own cultural preservation is not perceived as being threatened by migrant populations. It's preserving your own culture, which is being destroyed by your own government. I mean, anti-establishment: discussion of the establishment's complicity in and support for the migrant crisis. Defeat the elite. So they're going that the establishment's right then. Oh, the establishment, you can't question the establishment. Well, you can't with you lot, because you're getting your funding. You're crawling to these people. You're crawling to these NGOs. You're crawling to your lobby group of choice to be funded to write your crap that then goes into Sky News and CNN and the government and gets spouted by the May regime. General anti-migrant, sentiments of fear, frustration of anger towards migrants and refugees. Now, this is just incredible. Absolutely incredible. Sexual threat. Discussion of the perceived sexual threat posed by migrants. Often in discussion of rape and sex crimes committed by migrants. So you're not allowed to talk about that then. So you've got the fake alt-right. They are always going on about this. About what's happening in Sweden. That Peter Sweden is called. He doesn't even live in Sweden. He was originally kind of pro-Palestinian. Then it all changed, and it looks like he's being pushed from somewhere else now. And it's all the same stuff. It's all the same stuff these people are spouting. They're spouting one narrative with no solution. They're giving you the problem, but they're not offering any solution. White displacement, the fear that migrant populations will completely erode the ethnic homogeneity of Europe. White genocide. Well, these things are facts, so you're not allowed to talk about facts at all. Yeah, case study, Unite the Right. Charlottesville. Yeah, they're going on about Unite the Right now. Key findings. The rally was among the first real-world events that brought together many loosely affiliated far-right communities of different ideological leanings. Did it really? Opportunistic coalition building. The rally organisers bridged ideological differences between sub-movement by tailoring their communication efforts to different target audiences and by highlighting the benefits of cross-fertilisation and collaboration. They're making it sound like some kind of science, and it's not. It's actually ridiculous. The official Unite the Right trailer stressed the threat of white genocide, linking the destruction of cultural symbols such as General Lee's statue to a wider conspiracy theory, arguing that the international Jewish system, the capitalist system, and the forces of globalism seek to erase the European people. Oh, they have to put themselves first then. So they're talking about the Jewish system first. Well, there isn't an international Jewish system. There's an international system that supports a certain ideology. And that ideology is against the interests of the host population. So there you go. Private discussion in the closed chat rooms of the messaging application Discord. The hate posts and calls for violence against Jews, blacks and anti-fascists, Antifa, were common. Well, Antifa are the people who threaten with violence all the time. And it's absolutely, incredible stuff. I think people should just read it, just so you can see what's going into the government. Because these papers are incredibly important, I think. They are the most important thing because these are actually creating the paradigm. What culture are we supposed to be protecting here? Class structure. Well, this is the thing, you see, because what they're saying is that if you in any way support anything indigenous about your own country, then you're an extremist. And these people, it's absolutely sickening where they're coming from. The front of it is unbelievable. You would not believe that this could happen. But again, it's very much like what I was saying earlier. Because people are letting this stuff fill them, then it's actually stopping down any debate. And the way things have gone in the last couple of years, has been astoundingly fast, and it's hard to keep up with it. I mean, if we look at, to finish off with, the Frankfurt School, which is where all this stuff comes from, they promoted the creation of racism offences, continual change to create confusion, the teaching of sex and homosexuality to children, the undermining of schools, teachers' authority. That's a biggie. That happens all the time now. Huge immigration to destroy identity, the promotion of excessive drinking, emptying of churches. Well, the churches, as Dr. Richard Day said, will help us. They will help us, and they have. The Church of England is right on board with all the subversive agendas going. An unreliable legal system with bias against victims of crime. Oh, I think that one resonates a bit. Yes, dumb down the kids. Aye. Thanks, Babushka. Dependency on the state or state benefits. Now, this is a massive thing, because this is what they're doing. They're encouraging this horrendous voluntary sector into everything, run by change agents. And it's everywhere like a virus. And I would urge everybody out there, do not volunteer for your local council. Have nothing to do with this. Because this is all about recruiting the spies. The spies, who are they? Oh, they're going to be the kids who are holding speed guns when they cannot swear testimony to that in court because they're too young. How can you have a kid with a speed gun? It's ridiculous. So it can't be sworn. So it can't be actual testimony. It can't be put in front of a court. So in other words, it's summary by a 12-year-old. It's ridiculous, ridiculous, ridiculous. Control and dumbing down of the media. Well, I mean, there you go. That, my original point. Kay Burley, Journalist of the Year. Control and dumbing down of the media. Absolutely. Encourage the breakdown of the family. I suppose, in conclusion, that's a good place to actually leave it. But we've just got this full spectrum dominance of it all now. And I did an article a while ago called Martial Law Terror Clowns, who were sitting ducks for terror, scaring the public. And they were just they're dressed up in these clown costumes, basically, like RoboCop, with angle grinders in front of them. And so it's like there should be a kitchen sink there. It's unbelievable. And all this they're there for is to scare the public. And this all came out after the Westminster attack. They started deploying them on the streets. But the way things are going, they don't need that anymore, you see, because they've got the citizen spy program. Thanks, Babushka. I'm actually, week by week, I'm struggling now to find new things to talk about because everything's so big, and I'm trying to get a solution going here. But I think the original idea, look into what the Rosicrucians did, their original way of getting things out by distributing pamphlets for this organisation that you could ask to join, but nobody knew who it was. In other words, be the Invisibles. The Invisibles are the future, I think, because everything now is being absolutely taken over. I would never form a group. Everything I've been involved with over the years, every honest group that I've been involved with has been entirely taken over. Most of the alternative media, in my opinion now, is a huge amount of controlled opposition in there. And when I was at the People's Voice, I had to put up with a bit of controlled opposition coming on the show because I had a producer, and I would see the people that he lined up for the show and go, oh my God, not him or not her. And I only had a few of them, and I managed to stop that after a while because I talked to David Icke about it, and I said I didn't need a producer because that was a big problem. You can't have gatekeepers anywhere. So thanks for listening, everybody. I mean, I hope it was some help tonight. At the beginning of the show, I was kind of wondering where to take it because I had a lot of stuff and I still do. But I think that paper, the Fringe Insurgency, I'm going to post it, I think, on Windows on the World. I might be able to post it into chat, actually. I'm not sure about that. But it's worth having a look at. And this is the sort of deviant subversion that is going on everywhere, and the sort of stuff that I've been looking at for a really, really long time. In conclusion, everybody, thanks for listening. Come along to Glastonbury on the 16th if you're in the area at the King Arthur pub, and we'll have a great day, and maybe we can get some plans going for the future. I'll see you all next week on Windows on the World. Thanks very much, everybody.